All right, we are live. Just need to set the sound to studio mode. And here, maybe adjust the camera a little bit. Hello, everyone. It's time for another fun-filled edition of the Quadcast, one of YouTube's multi-channel themed channels. We actually have more than one multi-channel themed channel on YouTube these days, which is awesome, especially since I am so bad at posting material regularly. I keep on saying that's going to change. It probably isn't, but I'd like it to, and it might at some point. These days, my primary focus has been on converting Q8s using the modified TAC deck, but there's so many other things on the to-do list, and one of the things that has really been put off for far too long is to finish talking about SQ quadraphonic sound and shootout comparison things, and really do a proper review of the Involve Audio Surround Master, because I told them I'd review this box like years ago, and I didn't want to do it until I really thoroughly sat down with it, spent time with it, and listened to it, and really, you know, I listen to stuff, I like it, but to really critically listen and really come up with that's a lot of pressure. You want to get it right, and I'm still not sure I got it right, but I spent past few hours with this box and with files and with stuff, and it's time to talk about that. So for those that maybe feel like you're jumping in the middle here, a while ago I was going to do an SQ shootout, and I did part of it, and I don't even remember the results at this point or where I was in the middle of that, but I was reminded of this when I received a message from someone asking about some files or things I have, and I had basically promised to, since I can't get around to finishing a proper shootout here, to take the materials I had prepared and put them out there to the world so that people can kind of take them, digest them, form their own opinions with them. And so that is actually getting uploaded as we speak. It's probably going to take a long time. Oh, it finished. That is how long I have been sitting with the Involve Audio box. The hours that it's going to take for the files uploaded. So yeah, that link needs to get posted in the description of this video, which I will do. I don't know if I could do that and talk at the same time. I could probably do that and talk at the same time poorly. But let's see, is there a chat room somewhere in this thing? I always forget to check chat. There's so many things to think of at the same time when you broadcast solo. Professionals have producers that take care of all those other things. But somewhere there's a chat, and I never see the chat. I probably had to actually open up the video in another tab, and then I see the chat. Yes, the chat is there. I can also edit the description of this video and put that link in there so people could start downloading it while I'm talking about it. SQ materials can be found here. And there's the link. And there's the save button. Right. So what I did was I went through my collection of SQ records, because there's a lot of discussion about like script decoding with a software process, the Involve SQ decoder, the Tate, how does it compare? And I really wanted to kind of get to the bottom of, well, you know, what do we all think of all this? And instead of a lot of speculation, you know, really sit down, compare things. So I grabbed SQ material, recorded some things in that I thought would be good samples that I also had discrete versions of, and took my one prepared file of recorded in records that were kind of cleaned up, declicked as I wanted it, sent one off to Oxford Dickey, who ran his Phoenix process on the file, Send it to, I forget who else I sent it to. Someone that has a Tate, because my Tate's been in the shop for 10 years. I don't think I'll ever see it again. And so someone else ran it through their Tate, and I ran it through the file itself. Normally I'd run the records directly through that, but for consistency across the board, the same file that was getting script decoded and run through the Tate, I ran through the Involve Audio Surround Master. And I had enough material that would take many hours if I was going to send it out to people and say, listen to all of this and write down your thoughts about it. And I stripped it down to 4 tracks, which was basically a stress test that I think made it very difficult because they were tracks that were particularly hard to decode, which is good for one thing, but if, everything kind of doesn't do well, then what are you comparing? So I took all the materials I had, took a listen to it, and took some notes. And I think the big word when it comes to SQ is compromise. I mean, in the days of quadraphonic sound, it was always about a compromise. A compromised way to get 4 channels into a record that could support 2 channels. And there were different compromises. You have your discrete, which would use a high-frequency carrier that came with its own types of compromises, which is a very difficult format to play back properly, but can do great things when done properly. SQ was a little easier, but in the sense of, the demands to get a proper decoding were a little easier, but what a proper decoding sounds like is going to be compromised. Due to the nature of the beast there. And so when it comes to decoding, you got one of the big criticisms that the Tate gets is you could sometimes hear pumping. And yet that's because of how it's designed to try to be more discreet. And so I think there was discussion in the forums from the Involve Audio people that they could have set the Surround Master to be more discreet. But they didn't. They found what they felt was the best compromise. And there's been some talk about setting controls in or making a version that you could set it to be more discreet if you want to, which I think would be cool. But, after reading these things, I think they really dialed in where they think it best should be with a lot of serious listening. And I wasn't sure if some of the critiques that were came in through the shootout were from people that were isolating channels. And when I sat down to my listening, I made a point to not isolate channels on the SQ playback, because how much can you discern? And I think that's what SQ is based on. Our ears aren't that great, really, compared to other animals. So one of the tracks I had in the running that didn't make the final cut was Evil Ways by Santana. I didn't have a good discrete version at the time, so that made it easy to kind of just put it on the chopping block when I would need to whittle things away. I've since converted my QA to that. It is a pretty discrete mix. Drums are clearly in the rear right, guitar clearly in the front right, organ in the rear left. You got some more percussion in the front left. Bass is pretty centered, and the vocals are distributed around the room. Now the Tate, I noticed some pumping on the organ, especially during the organ solo. But I think the basic effects of the mix actually held up. The Involve was very similar, but no pumping. I did make a note that the vocal effect might have been a little smeared, a little harder to detect than the discrete, and maybe the Tate. I don't know. I went back and forth a lot of times, and by the end of it, I wasn't sure what I was hearing anymore. But my initial impression was there might have been a little bit of smearing on the vocal. But overall, I preferred the Involved to the Tate. The pumping can be distracting, and having a decode that was pretty much held up to the Tate, but without the pumping, was really good. The Phoenix decode, I feel like software decoding processes have come a long way, but there's still some kind of an artifact in the high frequency on many of them. And it's definitely a lot less than it used to be. Some of these tracks I didn't even notice an artifact, but this one I felt like I was detecting it. It is a pretty, I mean, the recording had a pretty crisp drum to start with, so that probably contributed to it. One of the stress test tracks that was on the shootout was "Traveling Prayer" by Billy Joel. Oh yeah, well basically, bottom line of you ways was the Involve was my preferred one after listening to all of them, and I thought it did a really good job with it. "Traveling Prayer" by Billy Joel, I singled that track out particularly because I've always noticed that the drum that starts off the song is supposed to be in the rear, and when you record it in and look at your levels, it's not in the rear. It just doesn't decode right, and I really wanted to see, can anyone decode it right? You know, the Tate doesn't. Will the Involve do it right? Will the Phoenix software decode do it right? And I don't know if I'm biased because I know what I'm supposed to be hearing, but even though the levels pretty much have that drum just as loud in the front as in the back, I don't think, I think the decodings do make it sound more in the back. Maybe it's a new EQ thing going on. Maybe it's only a certain level of frequencies that are leaking to the front that are lifting up the level meter, but it's definitely compromised. But I think the basic mix of Traveling Prayer did hold up. The Tate, I made a note that the cymbals don't sound clear in the back. That should. The Involve, what did I said something about a less stereo spread in the Involve. That could be maybe a smear effect. At the end of it, I couldn't decide what I preferred between the Tate and the Involve. I think I'll call that one a toss-up. But I think they both really held up the basic principles of that quad mix from what I remember. Obviously, that drum was compromised, but the rest of the elements, you know, front, back, kind of held up. The Phoenix got the cymbals right. And I was not detecting a swirliness. I actually gave this one to the Phoenix. You know, the Tate and the Involve both had their compromises on it, and I think the Phoenix software decoding did a great job with Traveling Prayer. Next cut that was in the shootout, Sweet Emotion by Aerosmith. One thing I noticed was that, like in the beginning, there's a little shaker that's in the rear left. That seemed to got lost in the SQ decoding. That said, there are real subtlenesses in that mix that really get lost in SQ, and I've known that from listening to Tate decodes versus discrete. And I've done that, you know, isolating channels. When you put it all together, though, I'm not sure how many subtlenesses in a mix you can really detect without isolating channels. And the basic principles in the mix do hold up in SQ. You know, you get the guitars that come in the back and the backwards effect that comes in the back. But certainly there are subtlenesses that are lost. I really call this one a toss-up. Although I thought the Phoenix sounds great. Like, I was kind of surprised because I'm so used to there being little detectable artifacts on the software decoding. But really, that one was a toss-up. Probably not the best track to listen to in SQ. Grab a Q8. Funky Waltz. Oh, who's that by? That's Larry Coryell. I really need to convert that Q8. That one, I preferred the Tate, but they were both very close. And the Phoenix software decode, it was a toss-up with a slight edge to the Tate, maybe, I wrote down. One thing I've noticed is my Tate decode has more bass than the other decodes, and I don't know why that is. The same file went through everything, so I don't know if the Tate does something that brings out the bass in the sound, which will help give it an edge if all other things are even. So I've tried to compensate for that and not let that sway me, because that's not completely fair. This is more about decoding, and you can turn up the bass knob. But on all these, I gotta say, I mean, these are all. We're really getting into the fine details here, and you're seeing something emerge here. It's not one clear winner when it comes to Tate versus the Surround Master versus software decoding. I mean, I gave Traveling Player to the software decoding, which I was surprised at. Evil Ways went to the Surround Master. The Funky Waltz went to the Tate. So it's kind of a tie here. When it comes to putting all these SQ decoding methods up against one another. I had a track from the Shaft soundtrack, instrumental track. I don't think that made the final cut on the shootout that went out there. Which track is that? Okay, I need to look up what the name of that track is. You get to watch this happen live here, so we just got to pause for a moment. So off the Shaft soundtrack, No Name Bar. And the reason I wanted to include that one on the shootout was because I wanted to include things that were not on Columbia Records. Most SQ items are with Columbia, and I wanted to give other labels representation that also used SQ, because they might have approached surround mixing or quad mixing differently. That's why I included The Funky Waltz by Larry Coryell, and why I wanted to include No Name Bar. It's a nice, fun instrumental track that has a nice spread in quad. And that one got dropped because I didn't have a discrete version prepared at the time. But I've since I grabbed a DTS CD I had of Tab's Fostex conversion and brought that up to do my little comparison here. And at the end of that, I preferred the Involve because the flute was in the rear left and the Tate gave me some pumping. The Involve handled that better. So it was another case of the Involve had a better compromise of not pumping as much as the Tate, and otherwise the mix and positioning held up rather well. The mix has a crispy hi-hat, and the Phoenix brought that out in a certain way that I felt like there was an artifact there. So I kind of, I'm getting to the point with the Phoenix software decoding that I'm kind of questioning, am I hearing something because I'm expecting to hear it? Am I making it up? I think there's still an artifact there. I want to believe there's not, and I know a lot of work has been put in eliminating the artifacting from software decoding, but the type of digital processing we're doing there, it's still there a little bit. There was an E-Power Biggs track on the shootout, which was brass and organ in a cathedral type setting, and really I didn't like how anything decoded that one. There was a lot of room sound in that mix. It was very important. And yeah, there was positioning. There were instruments coming from the back and coming from the front, but it was a full room sound. And I felt like none of the SQ decodings gave a good representation of what was on the tape. And the Involve had a slight edge on the Tate, which was to be expected. I mean, the Tate wants things to be discrete. It's been long known that the Tate's not the best decoder to go to for ambient mixes. And the Phoenix decode tied with the Involve. I did not include on the shootout because it was way too long. The finale from the Bartok concerto for Bartok Concerto album that has the cover. Let me see if I can find that. Concerto for Orchestra, I believe, was the one. And it was. I should know this. It recently came out on SACD from Datum Vocalion. Mine's on order, hasn't arrived yet, but I'm gonna recommend buying it because I'm sure the quality of that's gonna be great. But I converted my Q8 of it a while ago, and the reason I bought that one in Q8 is because I bought an SQ record of it and never felt like I was hearing what I should be hearing from it. And I gotta say, I pulled that one up. I didn't like any of the decodings of the Bartok for the SQ. So I didn't even try to pick a winner. It's not really even worth it. Basically, SQ fails the Bartok. It's not worth owning on SQ. Not worth bothering with. I just was not getting the right effects out of it at all from any of the methods. So that kind of closes my thoughts on the SQ shootout. But that doesn't really cover a thorough review of the Surround Master. So after I did that, I grabbed a few records, I hooked up the Surround Master, I grabbed records that I'm familiar with the mix of, and I just spent a good amount of time listening to some songs I like on the Surround Master. And some of them played great, some of them played not as good as I remember them. But for the most part, I threw on a few songs on the 10 Years After a Space and Time, which I'm quite familiar with the quad mix of that album now. And I was enjoying it. I was getting into the music. I was hearing the surround effects. Threw on the Chase album a bit. Recently came out on SACD. And I was, that's got some swirling and some fun with it. That was definitely coming out. Throw on a little bit of Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon. Haven't pulled that SQ record out in a long time because with the quad mix available on the Blu-ray from the box set, who needs SQ? But that one I've always felt like was an SQ mix that decodes well. And at the end of the day, the Surround Master is not always the best decoder for every recording. But the differences between these decoders are sometimes pretty small. The ones that I picked the Tate, does that mean I would not listen to it on the Surround Master? Well, I don't have a Tate anymore. I have a Surround Master. You can buy a Surround Master. A Tate, you got to track down. It's really only worth going after a Tate these days if you're a real hardcore quad collector. So I gotta say, the Involve Audio Surround Master, great, a must-have for anyone that's into quad. It is great that in this day and age you could still buy a decoder for these records, because a lot of the older decoders never did that great. The ones that do are hard to find, breaking down and going up in value. So it's a no-brainer. I mean, we could do great things with software decoding, but that means recording stuff in and processing it, and even then it's not all that perfect. If you just want to throw on a record and listen to quad, you can't go wrong with the Involve Audio Surround Master. It's the best compromise. And when it comes to quad, especially SQ, there's always a compromise. And if you just, I highly recommend buying the Surround Master, setting up in your system. I also ran some QS records through it. I haven't done a QS shootout. I wanted to. It's finding there's not much material for QS. But I put one of my Steely Dan records on, threw on a Jim Croce, and decoded really good in the Involve mode. It's certainly among the best decoders out there, and it's readily available and affordable. So, I mean, that's really my review. I sat down, spent time with it. If I get into the real nitpicky of it, it's not always the best decoder, but it comes close in those instances where it's not. And when it comes to just sitting down, listening, and enjoying tunes, yeah, it's great. So I think that kind of covers what I wanted to talk about when it comes to SQ. That said, I did throw up a bunch of files with a link that's in the description. They're only available for 2 days, though. And a lot of people these days have been using Volafile to be sharing stuff. Not everyone does torrents, and so that seems to be the preferred method I've noticed lately. So yeah, there's 5 files up there. And they're all 4-channel wave files. Front left, front right, rear left, rear right, for the track order. And there's one that's called discrete. That's basically a discrete version of everything. The SQ source, if you want to run it through your own decoders. The Involve decoded, Tate decoded, and Phoenix decoded, which is Oxford Dickey's Phoenix process that he did on that file. So yeah, go grab the files, take a listen, do some comparison, do some listening. And, you know, it could be a fun topic to discuss. I think that kind of covers everything I wanted to cover with SQ sound. So I'm going to get back to working on those Q8s on the TIAC. A lot of great stuff in the works. So keep your eyes out. And hey, rate some comments if you have any questions. I'll be glad to answer them. If anyone has anything in particular they'd like to see me do a live broadcast about on this channel, I haven't been posting all that regularly, but I've not really known what to really do with this channel. And I think something like this is more fun with more involvement. So if anyone's got ideas, reach out to me. You can always reach out to me through here, over in the Quadraphonic Quad forums. So once again, thank you everyone for tuning in and checking out this video, and happy holidays.